They call me a mistake. A dull Omega with no value, no scent, and no future. My own father treated me like property, until the night I ran into the one man even he was afraid of. Seo Kade wasn't just an alpha. He was a ghost story. An enforcer. A man who didn't know how to be gentle. Until he found me shivering in the Seattle rain. This isn't just a romance, it's a story about a love so devoted, it doesn't just claim you, it rebuilds your entire world from the ashes. If you're ready for a story that moves from deep angst to the kind of healing we all dream of, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and join us here at my BL Story Room. Before we dive into Chapter 1, I want to know who is listening tonight. Our community is growing every day and I want to see how far we've reached. Type the city or country you're watching from in the comments below. I'll be hearting my favorite locations. Now, take a deep breath. Let's go back to the night the rain felt like lead. Chapter 1, the Omega nobody wanted. The rain in Seattle didn't feel like water, it felt like lead. It was heavy, cold, and it soaked through Jane's expensive wool coat until he felt like he was being dragged into the pavement by the sheer weight of it. Inside the glass-walled gala behind him, the air smelled like expensive alphas, cedar, sandalwood, and the sharp, metallic tang of power. But here, on the service balcony, Jane smelled like nothing. Just wet wool and the faint, sour hint of his own rising panic. "You're shaking again?" His father's voice had sliced through him 10 minutes ago, right before Jane bolted. "Look at you. 24 years old and you still can't stand in a room of alphas without looking like a kicked dog. You're a stain on the Han name, Jane. A literal, genetic mistake." The words weren't new. They were the background noise of his entire life. But tonight, seeing his younger brother, a perfect alpha, being toasted by the city's elite while Jane was told to stay in the corner so no one notices the scent of your cowardice, something finally snapped. Jane gripped the iron railing. His knuckles were white. His breath came in shallow, jagged hitches that hurt his chest. "I'm a mistake. I'm a mistake. I'm a mistake." He wasn't just an Omega. In the Han family he was a dull Omega. His pheromones were weak, his frame was too thin, and his nerves were made of glass. To his father he wasn't a son. He was a defective piece of equipment that cost too much to maintain. He pulled a small plastic bottle from his pocket. Suppressants. He was supposed to take them to keep his cycle invisible, but his hands were trembling so hard the bottle slipped. It clattered against the metal and vanished into the dark alley below. "Great," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Perfect." A wave of heat washed over him, not the good kind. It was the frantic, oily heat of a stress-induced slick. His body was reacting to the trauma, trying to signal for a protector that would never come. Because who would want a broken thing? He looked down at the street. Black asphalt, glowing with the reflection of neon signs. He couldn't go back inside. He couldn't face the pitying looks or his father's disgusted sneer. He didn't have a plan. He just had a need to disappear. Jane stumbled down the back service stairs, his legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. He hit the alleyway, the trash-scented air hitting his lungs. He began to walk. Then he began to run. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away from the Han name, the Han scent, and the suffocating realization that if he died tonight in this rain, the only thing his father would be upset about was the cost of the funeral. His lungs burned. The United States of his reality wasn't the land of the free, it was a cage of hierarchies. As an Omega with no alpha and a family that loathed him, he was nothing. He turned a corner, his vision blurring. The bright lights of a dive bar, the iron den, flickered in the distance. It was the kind of place a Han would never step foot in. A place for the rough, the unbonded, and the dangerous. Jane didn't care. He needed to hide. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors, the heat of the bar hitting him like a physical blow. The smell inside was overwhelming. Tobacco, cheap bourbon, and the heavy, thick musk of dominant alphas. It should have terrified him. Usually, it would have triggered a full-blown meltdown. But tonight, the panic was so high that it had looped back around into a strange, numb recklessness. He slumped onto a stool at the far end of the bar, hidden in the shadows. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared at his wet hands. "Water?" he croaked when the bartender leaned in. "You okay, kid? You smell like..." The bartender paused, sniffing the air. His eyes darkened. "You smell like you're about to have a very bad night. You got a mate?" "No," Jane said, his voice trembling. "I don't have anyone." He didn't notice the silence that rippled out from the booth behind him. He didn't notice the way the air in the room suddenly grew heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. He only noticed the scent. It was different from the others. It wasn't sharp or aggressive. It was deep. Like rain on hot stone. Like a forest after a fire. It was a scent that didn't ask for space, it just took it. Jane's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a presence behind him. Someone large. Someone who made the air feel electric. "You're in the wrong place, little bird." The voice was a low growl vibrating right at the base of Jane's spine. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation. Jane turned his head slowly. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the very shadows of the bar. Dark hair, eyes that looked like they had seen everything and hated most of it, and a scar that ran jagged across his jawline. He wore a heavy leather jacket and his hands, scarred and large, were shoved into his pockets. This was Seo Kade. In the city, Kade was a ghost story. The alpha who did the work no one else wanted to do. The enforcer. The man who didn't belong to a pack because no pack could handle him. Jane should have run. Every instinct his family had beaten into him told him to cower. Instead, Jane looked at Kade, really looked at him, and saw the same thing he felt. A total, crushing isolation. "I know," Jane whispered, his eyes filling with tears he couldn't stop. "I'm in the wrong place. I'm the wrong person. I'm just wrong." Kade's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, invading Jane's personal space. The scent of rain and stone intensified, wrapping around Jane like a blanket. For the first time in his life, the scent of an alpha didn't make Jane want to disappear. It made him want to lean in. Kade reached out. It was a slow movement, giving Jane every second to pull away. "You didn't?" Kade's thumb brushed the corner of Jane's eye, catching a stray tear. "Who told you that?" Kade asked. "Everyone," Jane choked out. Kade leaned down, his lips brushing against Jane's ear. "Well," he murmured, his voice sending a shiver of pure, terrifying heat through Jane's body. "Everyone is about to be wrong." In that moment, the door of the bar swung open. Two men in suits, Han family security, stepped in, their eyes scanning the room. "There he is," one of them pointed. "Jane? Get over here. Your father is beyond livid." Jane froze. The familiar cold dread washed over him. He started to stand, his body ready to submit because that was all it knew how to do. But a heavy, warm hand landed on his shoulder. It didn't grip him hard, but it was an anchor. Kade didn't even look at the guards. He kept his eyes on Jane. "Do you want to go with them?" Kade asked. Jane looked at the guards, the symbols of his gilded cage. Then he looked at the scarred, dangerous alpha who smelled like the only safe place he'd ever known. "No," Jane whispered. Kade finally turned his head. He didn't stand up straight, but the energy in the room shifted. The guards stopped dead in their tracks. They recognized the man in the leather jacket. Everyone in this city knew better than to touch what Seo Kade had decided was his. "He said no," Kade said. The words were quiet. But the tension in the room was so thick it felt like it might explode. Chapter 2. A Night Without Names. The silence in the bar was the kind that made your ears ring. The two guards looked at each other, then back at Kade. They were alphas, trained, professional, but they weren't stupid. Kade wasn't just an alpha. He was a predator that the city's underworld had spent years trying to cage. "He's Han property, Kade," the lead guard said, his voice reaching for a bravado he clearly didn't feel. "Don't make this a thing. Just step aside." Kade didn't move. He didn't even puff out his chest. He just tilted his head, his thumb still resting near the corner of Jane's eye. "Property is a heavy word," Kade murmured. "Usually people who use it end up buried under the weight of it. Tell the old man the boy is staying here. If he wants him back, he can come find me himself." The guard's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to reach for the holster under his jacket, but Kade's eyes shifted, just a fraction, and the guard froze. Whatever he saw in Kade's expression made him realize that he wouldn't even get his hand halfway to his gun before his throat was opened. "Fine," the guard spat. "But you're dead, kid. You hear me? You're dead to that family." They turned and walked out, the heavy door slamming behind them. Jane's legs finally gave out. He slid off the bar stool, his knees hitting the sticky floor with a dull thud. The adrenaline that had kept him upright evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a cold, hollow terror. "I'm dead," Jane whispered to the floor. "He's right. I'm dead." A pair of heavy, scuffed boots appeared in his line of sight. Kade knelt down, his movements surprisingly fluid for a man of his size. He didn't grab Jane. He just hovered close enough that his heat radiated against Jane's damp skin. "Can you stand?" Kade asked. Jane shook his head, his eyes fixed on a crack in the floorboards. "No. I can't breathe." It was a full-blown panic attack. Jane's chest felt like it was being crushed by invisible bands. His heart was a frantic bird hitting the walls of a cage. He began to claw at his own collar, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Look at me," Kate commanded. It wasn't an alpha command, the kind that forced submission, but it was firm. Jane looked up, his face pale and slick with tears and sweat. "Breathe with me," Kate said. He took a long, exaggerated breath. Jane tried to mimic him, but it came out as a broken sob. The scent of rain and stone from Cade was getting stronger, more concentrated. It was a calming scent, something alphas could project, but Cade's was so thick it felt like physical silk. Without thinking, Jane reached out and grabbed the front of Cade's leather jacket. He needed an anchor. He needed something solid in a world that had just turned into liquid. Cade hesitated for a second, his body tensing like he wasn't used to being touched, before he reached out and scooped Jane up. He didn't carry him like a bride. He tucked him against his chest like something fragile that needed to be shielded from the wind. He walked out the back door into the rain, moving toward a matte black SUV idling in the shadows. Where are we going?" Jane managed to choke out as he was placed into the passenger seat. "Somewhere they can't smell you," Kate said. The drive was a blur of neon lights and windshield wipers. Jane sat huddled against the door, his body shivering violently. The stress was getting worse. He could feel the moisture pooling at the small of his back, and his own scent, usually weak, was starting to bloom into something sweet and desperate. It was the smell of an Omega in distress calling for a mate. Cade gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't say a word. He just drove. They pulled up to a nondescript apartment building on the edge of the industrial district. Cade led him up 3 flights of stairs to a place that smelled like old wood and Cade's signature scent. It was sparse. A bed, a desk, a few monitors, and a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. "Sit," Cade said, pointing to the bed. Jane sat. The room was dim, lit only by the streetlights outside. The silence was heavy. I need suppressants," Jane whispered, his voice thick with the onset of a fever. "I lost mine. If I go into heat here, it'll be bad for you. I know alphas hate the smell of a broken Omega." Cade walked over to him. He stood between Jane's knees, looking down at him with an expression that was hard to read. "I don't hate how you smell," he said. He reached down and began to unbutton Jane's wet shirt. Jane flinched, his eyes wide. "I'm not going to hurt you," Cade said, his voice dropping an octave. "You're freezing. You need dry clothes." Cade pulled a large gray hoodie from a drawer and tossed it to him. While Jane changed with trembling hands, Cade turned his back, staring out the window. When Jane was covered in the oversized fabric, which smelled overwhelmingly of Cade, the fever hit him in a sudden violent wave. His vision swam. He fell forward, his forehead landing against Cade's broad back. "Help me," Jane whimpered. Cade turned around, catching him. The proximity was too much. The scent of Jane's distress, mixed with the early notes of a forced heat, hit Cade like a physical blow. In the Omegaverse there is a thing called a soul echo. It happens when an alpha's protective instinct meets an Omega's total surrender. It wasn't supposed to happen between strangers. But Cade wasn't a normal alpha, and Jane was a man who had never been touched with kindness. Cade's hand moved to the back of Jane's neck. His thumb brushed over the sensitive scent gland there, the place where a mark would go. Jane let out a small, broken sound and tilted his head, exposing his throat. It was an invitation. A plea. "Save me. Omi. Just make the pain stop." Cade's eyes went dark, the pupils blowing out until they were almost entirely black. He leaned in, his nose brushing against Jane's pulse point. He could hear Jane's heart, fast, terrified, and hopeful. He didn't bite. Instead, Cade pressed his forehead against Jane's. He let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through both of their chests. It was a claim, but not a physical one. It was a promise. "I don't even know your name," Cade breathed. "Jane," he whispered. "Han Jaen." "Jin," Cade repeated as if tasting the word. At that moment, a sharp electric shock seemed to snap between them. It was the unintended bond, the scent tether. Jane's breathing suddenly synced with Cade's. The crushing weight on Jane's chest vanished, replaced by a strange, warm hum. Jane's eyes fluttered shut. For the first time in 24 years, the noise in his head went silent. He fell asleep right there, held up by the arms of a man the world called a monster, unaware that he had just tied his soul to the one person his father feared most. Chapter 3, The Alpha Who Doesn't Leave. Jane woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight on his chest. For a second he didn't know where he was. The ceiling was cracked and painted a dull industrial gray, not the pristine crown-molded white of his bedroom at the Han estate. Then the smell hit him. Rain and stone. It was everywhere. It was in the sheets, in the air, and tucked into the fibers of the oversized hoodie he was wearing. Memory flooded back like a bucket of ice water. The gala. The rain. The bar. The bond. Jane sat up so fast his head spun. His chest felt tight, but not with the usual jagged shards of a panic attack. It was a different kind of tightness, a dull, rhythmic pull that seemed to point toward the door. It was the scent tether. He could feel Kade's presence on the other side of the wall like a low-frequency hum. I have to leave, Jane thought, his heart starting to rabbit. I'm an Omega in a strange Alpha's house. He didn't bite me, but the bond? I've made a mess. My father is going to find me and... He scrambled out of bed, his legs feeling like jelly. He looked for his shoes, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the mattress. He had to go before Kade realized what a burden he was. He had to go before the notorious enforcer got bored of playing savior. He reached the bedroom door and pulled it open, expecting to find a dark, scary apartment. Instead, the living room was flooded with the weak, gray light of a Seattle morning. Kade was sitting at a small kitchen table. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket anymore, just a black t-shirt that showed the thick, corded muscles of his arms and a tattoo of a stylized compass on his forearm. He was drinking coffee and looking at a tablet. He didn't look up when Jane entered, but his shoulders shifted. "You're awake," Kade said. His voice was gravelly, the sound of someone who hadn't slept much. I'm sorry," Jane whispered, clutching the hem of the hoodie. "I'll go. I didn't mean to stay so long. I know it was the stress. My scent was probably annoying. I'll just find my coat and..." "Sit down, Jane." It wasn't a growl. It wasn't even loud. But the way Kade said his name made Jane's knees lock. Jane didn't sit. He stood frozen by the door, his eyes darting toward the exit. Kade finally looked up. His eyes weren't dark like they had been last night. They were a deep, stormy gray. He looked tired, but his gaze was steady. "You're not going anywhere," Kade said. "Your father sent out a missing person report an hour ago. Except he didn't call the police. He called his private security teams. They're looking for a stray Omega. If you walk out that door, you'll be in the back of a black car in 10 minutes. Jane felt the blood drain from his face. He sank into the nearest chair, his strength leaving him. "He'll never stop. He thinks I'm his property. He needs me for some business merger next year. I'm just a piece of paper to him." Kade pushed a mug of coffee toward him. It was black and smelled burnt, but it was warm. "He can think whatever he wants. He's not getting in here." Jane looked at the coffee, then at Kade. "What? You don't know me? You saw me for 5 minutes in a bar and now you're hiding me from the Han family? Do you know who they are? They'll ruin you." Kade leaned back, his chair creaking. He looked around his sparse, cold apartment. "They can't ruin a man who has nothing they want. I don't care about their money, Jane. And I don't care about their name. But the bond?" Jane's voice was small, barely a breath. "It was an accident. I was in distress and you helped me. You don't have to keep me. I can find a way to break it. I don't want to trap you." Kade was quiet for a long time. He watched Jane with a clinical, intense focus. Jane felt exposed like a nerve ending under a microscope. "Is that what you think love is?" Kade asked suddenly. "A trap." Jane flinched. "I don't know anything about love. I just know about debt. Everything in my life has a price. My room, my clothes, my food. I had to pay for it by being the perfect, silent Omega. I don't have anything to pay you with." Kade stood up. He was so big he seemed to swallow the light in the kitchen. He walked around the table until he was standing right in front of Jane. Jane held his breath, waiting for the demand. Waiting for Kade to tell him what he owed. A mark? A body? His freedom? Kade reached out, his hand hovering near Jane's face. Again he waited until Jane nodded slightly before he touched him. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of violence, but as he tucked a lock of messy hair behind Jane's ear, his touch was as light as a feather. "I'm not your father," Kade said, his voice dropping into that low, vibrating tone that made the scent tether hum with warmth. "And I'm not the alphas you grew up with. I don't want your debt. I don't want your submission." "Then what do you want?" Jane asked, his voice breaking. "I want you to eat," Kade said, pointing to a plate of toast and eggs he'd clearly made himself. They were a bit burnt and unappealing. "I want you to sleep. And then, I want you to decide what you want to do. For the first time in your life." Jane stared at the burnt toast. His eyes burned. Nobody had ever asked him what he wanted. He didn't even know how to answer. I don't know how to be alone, Jane admitted, a tear finally slipping down his cheek. I don't know how to breathe without someone telling me I'm doing it wrong. Then don't be alone, Kate said. He didn't move away. He stayed right there, a solid, immovable wall against the rest of the world. I'm not leaving, Jane. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until you tell me to go. Jane looked up at him, and for a split second, the gray world outside didn't seem so terrifying. The bond wasn't a chain, it was a lifeline. You're really staying? Jane asked. I'm really staying, Kate promised. Outside, the Seattle rain continued to fall, but inside the small, cracked apartment, the air finally began to clear. Chapter 4. Learning to breathe again. The next 2 weeks were a blur of cold sweats and gray mornings. Jane hadn't realized how much the high-dose suppressants his father forced him to take had been numbing his entire world. Now that he wasn't taking them, his body was screaming. It was a suppressant crash. A violent, ugly withdrawal that made his skin feel too tight for his bones. He spent most of his time huddled in Cade's bed, buried under 4 different blankets that all smelled like the alpha. It was the only thing that kept the nausea at bay. Drink this. Cade appeared in the doorway holding a glass of some neon green electrolyte drink. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his knuckles were freshly bruised. He'd been going out at night, doing whatever work an enforcer did, and coming back to play nurse to a shaking, sobbing Omega. Jane reached for the glass, but his hand was trembling so hard it rattled against his teeth. Cade sighed, a low sound that wasn't annoyed, just heavy. He sat on the edge of the mattress and took the glass back, holding it to Jane's lips. Small sips, Cade murmured. Jane drank, the cold liquid stinging his throat. When he was done, he slumped back against the pillows, his eyes watering. I'm sorry, Jane whispered, his voice raspy. I'm so pathetic. You're a high-ranking alpha. You should be out there running the city, not wiping sweat off a failure. Cade set the glass on the nightstand. He didn't leave. He stayed sitting there, his weight making a deep dip in the mattress. Is that what they told you? That alphas are only for running things. They told me alphas are the sun and omegas are just the dirt that hopes the sun shines on them, Jane said, a bitter laugh escaping him. Cade's jaw tightened. He reached out and grabbed Jane's hand. His palm was huge, covering Jane's entire fist. The sun burns everything if it's alone. It's not a hierarchy, Jane. It's a tragedy that they taught you that. For the first time since he'd arrived, Jane really looked at Cade's face. The man looked like he'd been through a war. His nose had been broken at least twice. There was a scar near his temple. He looked like someone who had fought for every inch of space he occupied. Why do you have a compass tattoo? Jane asked, his voice small. Cade looked down at his forearm. The stylized compass was dark against his tan skin. Because I spent 30 years not knowing which way was up. I grew up in the system. No family, no pack. Just people trying to use my scent and my size to hurt others. I got the tattoo to remind myself that I'm the one who decides where I go. Not a boss. Not an instinct. Jane's heart did a strange, painful flutter. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to be closer to that strength. Not because he wanted to be owned, but because he wanted to learn how to stand like that. A few days later, the physical sickness began to fade, replaced by a crushing, heavy anxiety. Jane tried to make himself useful. He hated being a burden. One afternoon, while Cade was sleeping after a long night shift, Jane crept into the kitchen. He wanted to clean the grease-stained stove and the pile of takeout containers. But as he scrubbed, the silence of the apartment started to feel loud. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like his father's shoes. Every shadow on the wall looked like a security guard. His breathing hitched. His hands started to shake. He dropped the sponge, the wet thwack sounding like a gunshot in his head. They're going to find me. Cade is going to get tired of this. He's going to realize I'm just a broken toy. He's going to throw me back. He sank to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He was hyperventilating, the air catching in his throat like he was swallowing glass. Jane. The bedroom door flew open. Cade was there in seconds, shirtless and alert, his alpha instincts flared by the scent of Jane's terror. He saw Jane on the floor and dropped to his knees beside him. Don't touch me, Jane sobbed, flinching away. I'm making a mess. I'm useless. I tried to clean but I can't even do that right. You should just take me back. Please, just take me back so I don't have to wait for you to hate me. Cade didn't pull back. He did something Jane didn't expect. He grabbed Jane's wrists, firmly but not painfully, and pressed them against his own chest, right over his heart. Feel that, Cade commanded. Under Jane's palms, Cade's heart was a steady, powerful drum. Thump thump. Thump thump. It was so calm. So grounded. Focus on the sound, Kade said, his voice dropping into that low, chest-vibrating rumble. There's no one here but us. Your father isn't in this room. The Han name isn't in this room. It's just a kitchen, a broken stove, and me. Jane's gasps slowly turned into long, shuddering breaths. He leaned his forehead against Kade's shoulder. The alpha's skin was warm, smelling faintly of sleep and that deep, comforting rain scent. I don't know how to do this, Jane whispered into Kade's skin. I don't know how to be a person without someone pulling my strings. You're learning, Kade said. He let go of Jane's wrists and wrapped his arms around him, pulling him into a proper hug. It wasn't sexual. It was a shield. You've been holding your breath for 20 years, Jane. You're allowed to take a few weeks to learn how to exhale. They stayed like that on the kitchen floor for a long time. The notorious Seo Kade, whose name made men tremble, sat in the dirt and the grease just to hold a trembling Omega who thought he was nothing. That night, for the first time, Jane didn't sleep in the bed alone. Kade lay on top of the covers, a solid presence at his back. And for the first time in his life, Jane didn't dream of cages. He dreamt of a compass pointing toward a home he was finally starting to build. Chapter 5, Choosing Each Other. The apartment was starting to change. It was subtle at first. A sketchbook sitting on the coffee table, the one Kade had brought home without making a big deal out of it. A soft blue throw blanket over the back of the worn-out couch. The air didn't just smell like Kade's rain and stone scent anymore. It had the faint, sweet undertone of Jane's recovery. It smelled like a home instead of a hideout. But this scent tether was getting louder. Every time Kade walked into the room, Jane felt a physical pull in the center of his chest, like a hook was buried under his ribs, tugging him toward the alpha. It was the unintended bond they'd formed that night at the bar. It was biological. It was instinct. And it was starting to scare Jane. You're staring at the wall again, Kade said. He was sitting at the small table, cleaning a handgun. The metallic clink slide of the parts was rhythmic and strangely soothing. Jane looked up from his sketchbook. He hadn't drawn anything yet. He'd just been tracing the lines of his own palm. Kade? Can I ask you something? Kade didn't look up, but his hands slowed. Yeah. This bond, the thing we did. It was an accident, right? Because I was scared and you were there? Kade stopped moving. He set the barrel of the gun down on the soft cloth. He finally looked at Jane, his stormy eyes unreadable. It was a reaction, Jane. Your system was crashing and mine jumped in to stabilize it. It happens when an alpha and omega are compatible. Compatible, Jane repeated. The word felt too clinical. So, if it was someone else, if a different alpha had been there, would you have bonded with them too? Kade's jaw tightened. He stood up and walked over to the couch, sitting on the opposite end. He looked at the space between them, then back at Jane. No. I've spent 15 years in the gutter, Jane. I've been around hundreds of omegas in distress. I never felt a damn thing. Not until that night. Jane felt his heart skip. But you haven't marked me. Everyone says that if an alpha claims an omega, he marks them immediately. Especially a notorious one like you. People are probably wondering why you haven't finished the job. Is that what you want? Kade asked. His voice was dangerously low. For me to finish the job? To put a hole in your neck so everyone knows you're off limits? No. I don't know, Jane whispered, his fingers twisting in the fabric of his oversized hoodie. It's just that everyone has always made decisions for me. My father, my tutors, my doctors. Even this bond, it just happened. I don't want to be with you just because our biology decided it for us. I don't want to be a biological necessity. Kade shifted, leaning closer. The heat radiating off him was intense. Jane, look at me. Jane looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I haven't marked you because a mark is permanent, Kade said, his voice rough. And you've been a prisoner your whole life. If I mark you now while you're still healing, I'm just another guard in a different uniform. I don't want you because of a scent tether. I don't want you because you're an omega and I'm an alpha. He reached out, his large hand cupping Jane's jaw. His thumb brushed over Jane's lower lip, a touch so tender it made Jane's breath hitch. I want you because you're the first person who ever looked at me and didn't see a weapon, Kade whispered. I want you because you draw flowers in the margins of your notebooks when you think I'm not looking. I want you because you're brave enough to stay here even when you're terrified. Jane felt a sob catch in his throat. This was the tension that had been building for weeks, the fear that he was just a responsibility to Kade. I'm not brave, Jane croaked. You are, Kade insisted. You're choosing to be here. Every morning you wake up and you don't run back to the safety of your father's money. That's more courage than I've seen in most of the alphas I work for. Kade leaned in until their foreheads touched. The scent tether flared, sending a wave of pure golden warmth through Jane's veins. It wasn't the frantic, desperate heat of that first night. It was slow. It was steady. It was calm. I'm not going to mark you today, Kade murmured against his skin. Or tomorrow. I'm going to wait until you can look me in the eye and tell me, without a single doubt in your head, that you want to belong to me. And not because you have to, but because you choose to. Jane closed his eyes, leaning into the contact. For the first time he didn't feel like a mistake. He didn't feel like a dull Omega or a genetic failure. He felt like a person whose heart actually mattered. Kade, Jane whispered. Yeah. I don't think I need to wait. Jane reached up, his small hands shaking as he gripped the front of Kade's t-shirt. He pulled the alpha closer, closing the tiny gap between them. The kiss wasn't like the movies. It was clumsy and desperate. It tasted like coffee and salt from Jane's tears. It was the sound of two people who had been broken by the world finally finding a piece that fit. Kade groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated want, and pulled Jane into his lap. He didn't bite. He didn't claim. He just held him, his hands tracing the lines of Jane's back as if he were trying to memorize every inch of him. You're sure? Kade breathed against his neck. You're really sure? I've never been sure of anything else, Jane said, his voice finally steady. They didn't mark each other that night. They didn't need to. The bond that had started as an accident had been rewritten. It wasn't a tether anymore. It was a bridge. But as they lay together in the quiet of the apartment, the world outside was still moving. The Han family hadn't forgotten about their property, and the peace they had built was about to be tested by the very people who had tried to break them. Chapter 6. Confrontation with the Past. The peace didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly like ice over a lake in late March. It started with a black car. Not the SUV Kade used, but a sleek, silent sedan that looked like a drop of ink against the gray Seattle pavement. Jane saw it from the window while he was waiting for the kettle to boil. His heart, which had finally learned to beat at a normal rhythm, kicked against his ribs like a trapped bird. Kade, Jane whispered. Kade was at the table, his eyes fixed on a laptop screen, likely tracking the very people who were now outside. He didn't look up. He just closed the lid of the computer with a soft click. I know, Kade said. He stood up, and for the first time in days the nurse version of Kade vanished. The enforcer was back. His shoulders were set, his face a mask of cold stone. Stay in the bedroom, Jane. Lock the door. No. The word surprised even Jane. He stood his ground by the counter, his hands shaking but his feet planted. If I hide, he wins. He'll think I'm still the scared kid who ran away from a gala. I'm not. I'm not that person anymore. Kade looked at him, his stormy eyes searching Jane's face. He saw the tremor in Jane's jaw, but he also saw the way Jane was wearing Kade sent like a suit of armor. Kade nodded once. Stay behind me. If I tell you to move, you move. Understand? Yes. The knock at the door wasn't a bang. It was 3 polite, rhythmic taps. It was the sound of someone who owned the world and knew it. Kade opened the door. Standing in the hallway was Han Min-sung. He looked exactly the same, tailored charcoal suit, hair perfectly swept back, and a scent so sharp with artificial alpha dominance it made the air in the hallway feel thin. Behind him stood 2 large men, their hands folded in front of them. Min-sung didn't look at Kade first. He looked past him, his eyes landing on Jae-in. Look at you, Min-sung said, his voice dripping with a casual, polished disgust. Living in a cage like a stray. You always did have a penchant for the gutter, Jae-in. Jae-in felt the old, cold dread try to snake up his spine. He felt the urge to lower his head, to apologize for breathing. But then he felt Kade's presence. The alpha didn't even have to move. His scent, that deep, grounded rain and stone, rose up to meet the father's sharp perfume neutralizing it. You're on private property, Han, Kade said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a vibration to it that made the windows in the small apartment rattle. State your business and get out. Min-sung finally looked at Kade. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Seo Kade. The man who cleans the city's filth. I'll admit, I didn't think you'd be interested in my son. He's a defective model after all. Low pheromones, unstable temperament. He's more trouble than he's worth. He's worth more than your entire company, Kade replied. Min-sung laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Is that so? Then I suppose you won't mind paying the departure tax. Jae-in is signed into a legal trust. His presence is required for the Lihan merger next month. If he's not there, the family loses millions. And I don't like losing money. He stepped forward, trying to push past Kade. Kade didn't budge. He was a mountain of muscle and controlled rage. He's not a signature on a paper, Kade said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying growl. And he's not your property. He's unbonded by law, which means he stays where he chooses. He doesn't know how to choose. Minsung snapped, his composure finally slipping. He looked at Jaein. Get your things, Jaein. Now, stop this ridiculous tantrum. You think this man loves you? He's a killer. He's a mercenary. He'll get bored of your crying in a month and sell you to the highest bidder. Jaein stepped out from behind Kade. His legs felt heavy like he was walking through deep water. He looked at his father, the man who had spent 24 years telling him he was a mistake. He already knows I cry, Jaein said, his voice small but clear. He's the one who held me while I did it. You're the one who told me to go hide in a corner so I wouldn't embarrass you. Minsung's face twisted. You ungrateful little. I'm not coming back, Jaein said. He reached out and took Kade's hand. He didn't do it because he needed to be saved. He did it to show his father who he belonged to. The merger can fail. You can tell everyone I'm dead. I don't care. I'd rather be a stray in this apartment than a prince in your house. The silence that followed was electric. Minsung looked like he wanted to strike him, but the way Kade stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a dark, primal alpha light, made the older man recoil. You've made your choice then, Minsung spat. Don't come crawling back when you're starving. You're dead to the Han name. I'll have your accounts frozen by noon. You have nothing. He has me, Kade said. And I suggest you leave before I decide that the departure tax should be paid in blood. Minsung looked at Kade, then at the locked fingers of the two men. He saw the bond, not the biological mark, but the raw, emotional tether that made them look like a single unit. He turned on his heel and walked away, his guards following closely behind. The door slammed shut. Jaein held his breath until he heard the elevator chime down the hall. Then his knees gave out. Kade caught him before he hit the floor, pulling him into his lap right there in the entryway. Jaein was shaking, the adrenaline leaving him in a violent rush. I did it, Jaein sobbed into Kade's neck. I told him. I actually told him. I know, Kade whispered, his large hands rubbing circles into Jaein's back. I heard you. You were incredible, Jaein. I have nothing now, Jaein whispered. No money, no name, nothing. Kade pulled back, cupping Jaein's face. His eyes were soft, filled with a devotion that was more powerful than any alpha command. You have everything, Kade said. You have your life. You have your art. And you have a man who would burn this entire city to the ground just to make sure you can sleep through the night. Kade leaned in, and this time when he kissed Jaein, it wasn't about the bond. It wasn't about the past. It was a promise for the future. The Hans were gone. The cage was open. And for the first time in his life, Jaein wasn't just surviving. He was free. Chapter 7. A Future Built Gently. The new apartment didn't have glass walls or a view of the Seattle skyline. It was on the second floor of a brick building where the radiator hissed like an angry cat and the floorboards groaned under Kade's heavy footsteps. But the windows were wide, and the light that spilled across the hardwood floors every afternoon was golden and honest. Jaein stood in the center of the room, his fingers stained with charcoal and blue oil paint. In front of him was a large canvas, not the small hidden sketchbook he used to keep, but a real, sprawling piece of work. It wasn't a picture of a cage. It was a painting of the ocean at night, where the water met the stone, colored in shades of deep gray and electric blue. You're doing it again? A voice rumbled from the doorway. Jaein didn't flinch. He didn't drop his brush. He just smiled, the movement feeling natural now, a muscle he had finally learned how to use. He turned to see Kade leaning against the frame, holding two paper bags that smelled like greasy cheeseburgers and salt. Doing what? Jaein asked. Holding your breath while you paint, Kade said, walking over. He set the food on a crate they were using as a table and stood behind Jaein. He didn't crowd him. He just let his warmth settle over Jaein's shoulders like a heavy cloak. The doctor said you're supposed to remember to exhale. I was just finishing the light on the waves, Jaein murmured. He leaned back, his head resting against Kade's chest. It had been 4 months since the confrontation with his father. The Han family had officially disowned him, scrubbed his name from the social registries, and frozen every cent he had. To the world of the elite, Han Jaein was a ghost. But to the man holding him, he was the entire world. Kade had stopped doing the dirty work. He'd used the money he'd saved over a decade of violence to open a small, discreet security firm. He didn't hunt people anymore, he protected them. Mostly Omegas who were trying to escape the same kind of cages Jain had lived in. I sold the small piece today, Jain said, his voice bright with a quiet pride. The one of the rain on the window. A gallery in Capitol Hill wants to see more. Kade's arms wrapped around Jain's waist, his large, scarred hands resting over Jain's stomach. I told you. You're good, Jain. You were always good. They just didn't want you to know it because then they couldn't control you. Jain turned in Kade's arms, looping his paint-stained hands around the alpha's neck. He looked at Kade, really looked at him. The scar on his jaw was still there, the hardness in his eyes was still there, but there was a softness now, a peace that only came out when they were alone. Kade. Yeah. Jain reached up, his thumb brushing the skin just below Kade's ear, where an alpha's mating scent was strongest. I want to do it. The mark. For real this time. Kade went still. His pupils bled into the gray of his irises, his alpha instincts humming at the invitation. Jain, you don't have to. We're already happy. I don't need a mark to know you're mine. I know, Jain whispered, pulling Kade closer until their noses brushed. But I want the world to know I'm yours. And I want to feel you in my head all the time. Not because of a biological accident, at a bar. But because I love you. Because you're the first person who ever let me be me. Kade let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He picked Jain up, carrying him the few steps to the bed they'd bought together. A bed that didn't smell like withdrawal or fear, but like laundry detergent and them. He laid Jain down gently, hovering over him. His scent, rain and stone, was overwhelming, but it didn't feel like a weight anymore. It felt like home. I'll be careful, Kade promised, his voice a raw, jagged thing. Don't be too careful, Jain countered, a small, playful spark in his eyes. When Kade leaned down, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of Jain's neck, Jain didn't close his eyes in fear. He kept them open, watching the ceiling, watching the light change in the room. The sting was sharp, a flash of heat that radiated through his entire body. But then came the flood. The bond snapped into place, not a tether, not a chain, but a golden thread that connected every nerve in Jain's body to the man above him. He could feel Kade's heartbeat as if it were his own. He could feel Kade's fierce, unwavering devotion, his protective rage, and his quiet, shimmering love. It was a symphony of emotion that drowned out every cruel thing his father had ever said. I'm not a mistake, Jain thought, his fingers digging into Kade's shoulders as the alpha branded him. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. An hour later, they were tangled together under the sheets, sharing a lukewarm burger and watching the sun dip below the Seattle skyline. The mark on Jain's neck was red and tender, a permanent badge of his own choice. What are you thinking about? Kade asked, his voice thick with post-bonding bliss. Jain watched a stray pigeon land on their windowsill. He felt the phantom weight of his old life, the gala, the cold wool coat, the fear of his own shadow. It was still there, a ghost in the corner of the room. But it was fading. I was thinking about the painting, Jain said, leaning his head on Kade's shoulder. The ocean one? No, Jain smiled, closing his eyes. The next one. I think I'm going to paint a compass. But I'm going to paint it broken. Kade frowned, his thumb stroking Jain's hip. Why broken? Jain turned his face into Kade's neck, breathing in the scent of his alpha, his partner, his best friend. Because, Jain whispered, I don't need a compass anymore. I'm already home. The radiator hissed. The city hummed outside. And in a small, unremarkable apartment, two people who had been told they were monsters found the only thing that was ever real. They weren't perfect. They were scarred, they were anxious, and the world was still a dangerous place. But as Jain fell asleep in Kade's arms, he knew one thing for certain. The rain would still fall. But he would never have to stand in it alone again. Jain finally found his home, and it wasn't a place or a gilded cage. It was the steady heartbeat of the man who refused to let him go. Stories like this remind us that no matter how many times we're told we're broken, there's always a version of the future where those cracks are filled with something stronger than what we lost. If Jain and Kade's journey moved you, or if you've ever felt like an underdog waiting for your own rain and stone protector, I'd love to have you stay a while. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button to join us here at the BL Story Room. We're building a sanctuary for these kinds of stories, the ones that hurt, the ones that heal, and the ones that remind us that devotion is a choice, not just an instinct. Drop a comment below. Which part of their story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment Kade stayed at the bar, or Jain finally finding the courage to paint again? I read every single one of your thoughts. Until the next chapter, stay soft, stay brave, and I'll see you back here in the room.